For this demo on rendering marble, a fairly smooth marble, I've chosen a marble pattern that is quite linear, as you can see, but also has some patchiness and mottled characteristic. It's also a mid-tone with a second color that is a lighter tone, maybe a 30. The darker tone in this stone is probably a 70. And so what I've done is elected to block in the three basic sides in 30 to begin, and then I added 50, and then I finished with 70, keeping it simple. So these basically are my light, mid, and dark tones. I just wanted to show this idea of rendering fast and simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lead with, and you can see that I have actually added in the pattern in pencil, which still shows, because I didn't scrub the paper too much. I just dropped my tones in and got them fairly smooth. This is still a little bit lighter than that, but that's fine because I want to use these lighter tones to show these lighter tones in the reference. I'm going to lead with a 50% marker, and I'm going to follow my lines that I've created, creating a kind of jittery line, skipping around. So I'm not doing this. That would be cartoony. I'm actually just going to break this line occasionally because I want the stone pattern to look like it's broken. It is actually underneath. This is not a break in the surface. It's strictly a change in color. And there is that slight change in direction going down the side. So these elements curve over and then go straight down. And I don't want to get these to be too regular. I don't want to space. Our tendency is to want to space things regularly. I avoid that because it starts to have a wallpaper design look, and this is a natural material, so it should have a random quality. So right about here I'm going to break into a few little scattered kind of stipple dots, but they're really strokes. And I will continue loosely indicating texture. Now you can see I'm not recreating what's on this piece exactly. That's okay. What I'm going for is the overall look. And so just to speed up our render here, show you in fast fashion how you can do a quick render, I'm just going to keep one eye on that reference and one eye on what I'm doing. And I'm going to literally do a texture wrap right around the whole object. And here again we have a sphere, elongated sphere. So I'm going to wrap that texture through and around, curves over like this. So I'm doing something like this. And there's that sphere shape. I'm going to bring that down the side. Now these feet, the top of the feet are rather dark. So I'm actually going to just almost block this in with tone. So I'm both drawing and filling with tone at the same time. And let's actually bring some more darkness up here on the front chest of this bear. So it's a very geometric object, even though it is an animal. It's still quite geometric. And you can see I've broken my pattern, less linear right there, and more of a fill, but an uneven fill. As we get into doing more intense textures, you're going to be using a lot of different stroke styles, and you're going to be intentionally creating uneven fill areas. So you can see I'm intentionally making this mottled. This is a very different approach to what we were doing on glass and chrome, where the focus was always on smoothness. And so right here you can see again I'm actually looking at my reference and saying, you know, there's some larger patchy areas here. Kind of protect that shape right there so I can see where it is. And I'll just keep going here with one marker, by the way, just with this 50% gray. It's really interesting how far you can go with one marker in establishing a render. So I'm going to go up to the muzzle here and pull that texture across. The key is always pay attention to your reference. How does the texture cross over surfaces? No real change in direction here. As I get into the dark shadow side, I actually do a little fill, but unevenly. And then I'm going to pull this shape across because that's what I see happening on the actual reference. So I don't go into autopilot and just keep doing this. I actually am looking at my reference and changing my stroke technique depending on what I'm looking at in the area I'm doing. So here again, second pass. Let some of these get a little thicker. Again, more of a linear pattern. Like that. So at that point, I'm going to break from 50. And I'm going to go back to 30. Why am I doing that? Because I don't want to overdo these dark tones. You can see right now these tones are not as dark as the darkest stripes in here, but they're getting there. And what I want to do is kind of back off a little bit, and with the broad end of the 30, I'm going to start indicating these lighter patchy areas in between. And you might have noticed I'm doing light to dark on this subject. The base tone was 30, so I therefore decided to go light to dark. If the base tone had been, say, 70, I actually would have blocked the whole thing in 70 and then developed the deeper shadows because they would have been in 80, 90, even 100, and then I would have started with white pencil. Different strategies for different situations. So right here you can see I'm kind of both sketching and filling with color. I'm using the broad tip of the marker like this, and I'm purposely being uneven in my pressure and stroke pattern. As I call it, it's like having too many cups of coffee and you kind of got the jitters. I actually don't want to just let the marker lay on the surface to do these strokes. I want that unevenness to build into the surface. And see, here's another structure you can see right here where it connects. I actually did not indicate that in my pencil, but I can bring it into being because it's a soft tonal transition. So again, paying attention to my reference, even though my drawing didn't have everything there, it was a starting point for the angle of the texture. And you can see just using 30 on top of 30 on top of 30, now the second pass of 30, I can keep darkening areas without overshooting the mark. That's really important to me. I hate overshooting the mark because that means I've got to go back in and lighten, which is more work. So down here at the bottom, there's a little wedge here and a bottom edge, and I'm actually establishing that. It's a slightly darker tone there. Right here I'm putting in the more of the deep tone to show the oval nature, and that's my highlight, believe it or not. I'm protecting it. And you can see now these top face of the feet actually are the same tone as I put in around it. So I'm going to switch back to 50 and darken again. So this is what I was mentioning last week. It's a step pattern down to the tones that you want. I'm just going to block that in and get there faster. And now since I have the 50 in my hand, I'm going to come back and progressively darken. So as I do this, my marks get more and more specific to the reference, so I'm now developing structures that are inside the material. Remember, this is not an actual change in the surface, it's actually a change in color. It's embedded material that represents a change in color. It's all smooth, the surface is. I'm just showing that little bit of separation. I'm exaggerating it a bit. On this edge, you notice I left a bevel right here. I think what I'd like to do now is actually get rid of that bevel and just do a soft transition right across. I'll actually add the soft transition on the left side in a minute. And now you can see how I switch. I switch from fill to sketching again, so painting to sketching, and then I actually start adding detail. I'm actually doing both at the same time, just seamlessly kind of moving back and forth, using the fine tip in this case. And you can see what I just did. I actually separated these two sides better. I'm thinking in tone, and then I'm thinking detail, texture at the same time. So here I go back to texture. Bring these two kind of linear shapes up. There's a third one down here. Get that reestablished. What happens with this kind of rendering is your pencil line, as you can see now, has completely disappeared. You could see it when I started this video. Now it's completely gone, except for a couple of little things like that. Edge details. Here again, switch back to fill, but just a bit to put a little more drama on the shadow side of that front face. And I'm actually fairly satisfied with that. So I'm going to move on to this part of the face, which faces in the same direction. Darken the ears a little bit. Now this is different here, this knob shape. It's actually lighter here. There's a lot of lighter material in there. And then there's this concentration of the darker material right here. So that's a color change. That defies what normally would happen. Normally this would be lighter, that would be darker, because it's a sphere or a light source coming in from above like that. Means this is where my highlight would be. But I got this dark area, this complex of dark color changes in the material, so I actually have to render it correctly, to like the reference, I have to show that. So that's a challenge. It means the color change is actually fighting against the light source. But that can be resolved. And now, one more pass with 10. I mean with 50, rather. To further bring out some of these unique structures. There's that nervous kind of too many cups of coffee stroke where I just kind of jump around and just look at my reference as I'm doing this. So it's very intentional. I'm not just randomly sketching in things. I'm trying to follow my reference. It's kind of like a web structure in the rock here. A web of darker tones, that is. And I'm just going to work up the neck here. And you notice I've just not even bothered to put much of a stroke on the edge. I'll actually add just a slight bit of a stroke here. And you see it gives a little bit more of a finish quality, but I don't want to overdo that because I don't see it in my reference. And at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to pencil. So I'm going to give you a feel. And we will switch back to marker as well. And I've got a 80% gray, a black, and a white. And so let's start on the light side. I need to get darker, so I'm going to use black. And I've sharpened it up nice. And I just use, so you know, I'm just using a basic handheld sharpener. It's a $2.50 sharpener, and I love it. It does actually very well. It's actually better than my electric pencil sharpener for that purpose. So I just really use the electric sharpener to do the initial sharpening, and then I just use the manual pencil sharpener through the rendering until this it needs to be resharpened. And you can see, so I'm at this point I'm really paying attention to the texture and trying to simulate a little bit more closely what I'm seeing. And again, it's the same kind of, this is what I'm doing. Same kind of sketchy, loose, nervous quality of my line work. But you know, you got to connect things. If you look at the reference, which I have in view there, you can see it's like a spider web that connects in places like that. So there's a very intentional kind of quality to it, even though it looks like I'm just randomly putting strokes in. And I'm going to cross over this edge from light to shadow. And here you can see the black really shows up very nicely in the shadow area. But I get really specific structures like this. So I'm going to, you notice I just changed my stroke pattern. I'm now leaving the pencil on the paper, and I'm actually conveying a little bit of this connecting web work like that. So now instead of doing this, I'm actually doing this. So if you see, it would be the equivalent of kind of connecting some of these shapes like that. So like I say, as we get into more complex textures, you're going to be using a lot more stroke styles, and you're really going to have to be inventive in determining what stroke is going to work best. I suggest on these renders, do little swatches to the side. I've indicated 3 swatches of the tones, but there's no reason you couldn't go in and kind of test your rendering style until you get what you want. Better to do that and learn there, make your mistakes on the side, and then take what you learn, your knowledge, into the render and get it right the first time. So now I'm going to take, let's see, shall I go back to a 10? Let's try a blender. Just a light blend. Now, progressively adding pencil and then blending in will actually start to smooth the pencil and the marker together. Remember, the pencil is translucent and it's wax-based. So as these blend together, you start getting, really recreating that kind of luminosity that marble has, where light penetrates into it, because your layering gets more and more complex. And what's really cool in these marble renders is to see where they suddenly just seem to glow from within, like the actual marble itself. And it's literally because the layers are built up to the point where the light, it has to penetrate through those layers of your marker. So you can see I'm scrubbing. This is one of the cases where you would scrub. I'm actually blending that first layer of pencil in. I'm deciding that I need it to soften in areas. So, and then remember to scrub out your marker. So at this point, I'm hunting for a 10 or a 20. And let's see here, that's a 30. Let's take a 10. Okay, so now I got my brush tip marker, which actually will work well here. I'm going to get some of these more subtle things happening. That mottled quality in the lighter tones. We're going to get that going. So this doesn't vary much in tone. It does in the reference. So here you see me kind of blocking in unevenly certain areas with that 20. And again, this kind of nervous quality to my strokes ensures that I don't do it too evenly. Now we switch to white pencil. And as I say, depending on the subject and the render, you may change your approach and do things a little differently. There is no one rule for a render. I could render this in a number of different ways and arrive at roughly the same result. But to me, going light to dark rather than dark to light was a must. I could have waited on doing pencil till I got farther along and just kept going with a marker and then saved the pencil for the end. Now what I just did there, you can see I brought up my highlight and I'm actually going to blend that in. So, like that. So I tend to want to emphasize this a little bit more than in the reference. Stone, marble is translucent, so that edge tends to disappear. I want to reestablish it a bit. Visually, I feel that defines the subject a little better. I can't tell you how many times Klein has said, define that edge better. You know, I don't see the edge clear enough in our product. We have to see our product clearly. So now you see the same thing with white pencil. I'm actually going in and kind of in a light, nervous sketch pattern, dropping in some lighter tones to brighten. You can't go over your black pencil with white unless you really bury the paper in black pencil, in that which case you really have to go in with the plastic eraser, which is this guy. This type of eraser is perfect for that, and just dig out that black pencil. If you overwork an area with pencil, my best suggestion is to do that, than to try to keep working into it. There's something called burnishing with Prismacolor pencils. That is where you layer so much that the paper is buried effectively and you're just pushing pencil into pencil. The general rule of thumb with colored pencil is you work light to dark. So I put the white down first in that case if I was really going to layer a lot of pencil, and I would move towards the darker tones and then finish with black. But I'm not doing that here, and you notice that because I'm dealing with a translucent 30 to 50% gray surface. And that means I want to blend back and forth until I get that translucence, literally layers showing through each other. So my strategy is, it's a bit changed. Here I am going in with a 20 again, and that's actually blending everything I've done, the white pencil, everything. It's not making the white pencil disappear, but it is putting a film of marker over the top, and I think now you can probably see how this area is starting to actually take on a kind of glow. The rendering would have to go a lot farther to get to that level of finish that I'm talking about. And I would say right now I'm a little more linear than the reference is. And having observed that, I'm going to change course a little bit. And I'm now taking, let's see, what did I pick up here? I always got to check. I picked up a 30. That's probably not dark enough. Let's go back to a 50. Or maybe a 40. And so now I'm going to make this kind of mottled pattern more prominent. One thing about these textures, they are challenging in the sense that they're complex. But they can be forgiving, especially marble, because if you're kind of missing, and like I did here, I went a little bit too linear, you can adjust that as you go by layering. There is a point of no return, of course, where you overwork an overlayer. Like I say, too much pencil on top of itself, and you got to just take the eraser and start pulling it back out and try again. But I feel like I have a lot of latitude still to experiment right now. I picked this particular stone sculpture, because it was a combination of a linear pattern and a kind of mottled patchy pattern. So it gives you a little bit of both as a demonstration. I see this is a little bit of a dark area, and I'm going to develop some alternating lights and darks. Darken that. Again, reconnecting these areas with that 40. Taking the color down towards the bottom and then working this formation that appears under the surface. Let's go right across that highlight in a few places. So you can see I strengthen the highlight, and here I am knocking it back again. This is what you're going to find with these more intense textures. It's going to be a back and forth, back and forth. If you don't go too far at any one time, you actually are gradually developing a nice rich texture. When I mean too far, I mean not putting too much pencil on too fast, not going too far with the marker too fast so that it gets too dark and then you're kind of stuck trying to lighten. So now I'm even slowing down more with my pencil, and I'm doing these kind of little rivulets of shapes in white because I see something like that happening in the stone. And so I switched now to circular short strokes, and I kind of migrate through an area. Literally what I'm doing there, just to show you in gray, I'm just doing this, and I'm kind of migrating up like that. So you can see I've got like short linear strokes. I've got nervous sketchy strokes. I've got little linear patterns. So I'm really changing out my strokes quite a bit. I just mentioned that because this is where the drawing element actually becomes a bigger part of the rendering all the way through. And this is a different kind of drawing. It's not perspective drawing. It's not like drawing the life study of the human figure. It's literally drawing out textures in detail and giving them the kind of quality that you see in the material. And here again, so I always overshoot the mark a bit, and then I knock back the texture. So I added the white, and here I go again. I actually blend in with a 10. Not a blender in this case because I want to tone down the white a little bit and even break up some of that linear quality I just created. And you can see what's going on. I'm actually enriching this texture each step of the way. And one last thing before I stop this particular video. I'll just readdress the dark side of the object here. You can see how this dark side looked so dark a few minutes ago and now it does not. That's because we have darkened the light side, so to get the contrast back, I'm actually darkening it more. Now right at this point, it's a little darker than it is in the photo. I do not panic because I still have a white pencil I can work with to bring that tone back, and I'll stop this video right here.